Welcome back, my dear friends, to another installment of Hope for a Better Life. We keep trudging on to the next story that we've been thinking about and talking about, which is the story of Cain and Abel. Hi, Dave. Good to see you again.
Ethan, how you doing?
Yeah, this is a challenging story in a lot of ways, but I'm happy and excited to be considering its deeper meaning. And I think we were talking when we started this whole thing about the unrestful time that we're in. And I think it speaks to some of the reason for that in human minds, ways that we're inclined to look at and respond to the world that are played out in that story. So,
Do you want to tell us about that right away, or?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about it. One of the things that I remember as a child, so Cain and Abel are the children of Adam and Eve. Just a quick summary of the tension point in the story is that Cain is a farmer and a tiller of the ground, and he has a certain offering to bring. And Abel is a shepherd and a carer of the sheep, and he has an offering to bring. And essentially, Abel's offering is looked on favorably by the Lord, and Cain's is not. And before we get into Cain's response and the tragedy of the story, I think it's fair to say that as a kid, I listened to this story and thought to myself, well, Cain just brought a gift from what he was doing. Why was it not acceptable?
Right.
And I'm not sure that you get there in a way that makes sense without understanding that there's a deeper level of meaning to this story. We talked about these stories being metaphors for our personal spiritual journey. And when I can connect that level of meaning to what's happening in the letter of the word, the story makes a lot more sense to me. So I don't know if that sets the table well enough for you to tell us a little bit about that deeper meaning, and then for us to riff on that a little bit. But that's kind of where I was hoping we could go in today's episode.
Well, here you talk about that makes me think about how people view God himself. Like, so is God that petty, and God only accepts us if we, like, what's wrong with some stuff I worked hard, I planted these crops and harvested them, and I brought them to you, and you're not accepting them. So what's up? What did I do wrong? What kind of God are you? Is there anything we can do to be accepted in God's sight? And Abel, he keeps sheep, and apparently that's good enough for the Lord. But so what's that all about? That kind of stuff. Because people have some funky ideas, of course, of who the Lord is. And one of the things that I love about New Church theology, of course, is that our picture that we're given of who the Lord is a very loving, wonderful God who's incapable of turning his face away from us or frowning upon us or disregarding us or any of those sorts of things that we can put upon God. And we're actually told that all of those things in the Old Testament about God being angry and wanting to smite people and so forth is really more of a projection of the state of the people at the time that were, trying to have a relationship with God. It's like, I'm angry, so I project that onto God or on, so it's not a genuine view of who the Lord is. So
I taught elementary school kids and would say something similar, that what we're reading was the read that people had of God, which held within it a deeper truth when we were ready to approach that and process it.
Yeah. Well, it's such an important thing. One of the passages from the writings for New Church talks about how that our idea of who God is like the first link on a chain. So everything else depends upon the strength of that link or how we're viewing that. So I've met many people throughout my life that have a very, I would call, difficult picture of who the Lord is. They struggle with being accepted or being loved because, God doesn't love me, God doesn't accept me, sort of tolerates me. What can I do to make it right in God's eyes? And just none of that stuff is even applicable to who the Lord is. The Lord is pure love, pure mercy, pure truth and wisdom and all those things. And just getting that right in our own head, if you will, or our own heart, make a huge difference to how we can maybe have a better life. How do we view who the Lord is? So I don't know if you want to riff on any more about that, but I think that's a really important thing to put out there is, how do we view God? How do you picture the Lord in your life, or God as you understand God? What's that like for you? Because I'll call it the traditional Christian view of God can make it for a pretty whacked out system, right? Because you have an angry God who created the human race, or God who created the human race, but the human race disappointed God, so God wants to wipe them out, right? So it's like, I'm going to destroy them all, which we'll get to in Noah. but I'm not going to wipe them out. But I have the son who I love. And the son says, well, if I go there and take on their punishment and die for their sins, and there's a blood sacrifice, then will you accept them then? Well, I'll accept them, but not because of them, but because of you. I love you, my son. So it's your merit can be attached to them, but there's nothing really they can do to make them lovable in my sight. So that's just a whack way to have to see God in your life. Like, I'm only acceptable because of somebody else, or
it sets up a dynamic where you almost have to barter for your love, where
right.
love really isn't unconditional.
Yeah.
And so you could almost see that whole system of belief as a projection. We're talking about church councils and decisions that were made long ago
Right.
about how we would view and respond to these things. But were those points of view themselves a projection of where people were in their own thinking about their lives and their own struggles against some of these dynamics that are talked about in the very beginning of the creation story, that left unaddressed leave us looking to ourselves for answers to questions that only can be answered by developing a relationship with the Lord. And if we're resisting developing that relationship, it's going to drive us to some pretty damaging conclusions
Right.
about who we are and what our life is for. And I wonder if that's a little bit of it. Maybe it's a more compassionate view, but I've lately thought, how much when you read those things, are you not reading angry, vindictive people that have arrived at the wrong conclusions to punish others? But it's the natural byproduct of not having been able, for a whole bunch of different reasons, to understand and respond to the Lord's love differently. And where that ended up leading the church, which is really the human race.
Right.
And what's possible, given what we know now, the path back to love, the path back to the Lord that's possible because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So another way of saying this, as one of my parishioners used to say, God is super cool. So, just keep that in mind, that there really is no angry, vindictive God that you have to appease in some way. But the Lord loves you always. And so, but then you see the story and you go, well, okay, if that's true, then what's going on here?
Yeah.
So, but as we talked about, this story has a deeper level of meaning. All of these stories are about us on a personal level or spiritual level. They're about the history of the humankind's connection to God and how that gets messed up. And so if we figure out that will help us see the story differently. So to give a little bit of that background on what that's about. So the Cain and Abel, we call them two parts of spiritual life. Cain pictures faith. Abel pictures charity, or a life of love and kindness. So the real question is, how do those live out, or what do we make a priority in our life, right? So it's easy. A lot of the focus in our world seems to be on faith and what you believe, rather than, well, what do you do with that? How do you live? Because we're actually told that charity or love unites people together, even if they have a bunch of different ideas about how to live their life. But faith, separate from charity, is very divisive, and it's all about, well, do you think the way I think? And do we see that show up in our world?
Yeah, right.
Right. Well, I can't agree with you, so therefore I'm going to write you off, or I'm going to insult you, or I'm going to, you're the other people and you're not acceptable to me. And yeah, I think we're struggling with that in huge ways in our world.
And then the answer to that I saw on a bumper sticker the other day, which I like, but isn't the complete story either. It said, your beliefs don't make you a better person, your behavior does.
Nice, yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to that, but one of the things that our theology spends a lot of time talking about is if you don't do it, you don't believe it.
Right.
So to say your beliefs don't make you a better person, your behavior does, well, what is informing that behavior? Right? There is a belief informing that behavior, and if that is a loving behavior, well, then there's a belief in a certain way to live, a certain way in which to set your heart
Right.
that is driving that behavior. Are we looking at that? Are we being intentional about that? As we've been talking about a lot in these different episodes.
Yeah.
Here's another story that bears out what it means to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you can learn all you want about spiritual things, right? But if you're not applying them to your life, then you just become a cranky Christian or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's all about, if you don't apply it, you don't do it, then it's just theoretical, right? Nothing changes.
Yeah, it's making life an intellectual construct, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can say all day long you're so full of love, but if you're never doing anything to
Right.
try to apply the love you supposedly aspire
Yeah.
to making better choices.
All right. If your partner, you tell your partner all the time how I love you, I love you, I love you, but you don't act loving, then what message are they going to hear? They're going
Right.
not going to hear the one that you think you're sending, right? Your actions are speaking so loudly I can't hear what you're saying, kind of thing. So, faith, charity, the church's priority, people's priority, that's what the story is about. So it's talking about historically how people in the earliest church lost sight of what spiritual life is all about, or what life's all about, which is about love and kindness and charity, looking out for each other, and got so focused on the theology, the teachings, which, that's what Cain pictures, is just that theological viewpoint of life without applying it. And so you don't get what you want, you get a little upset, It's not about, oh, I'm so happy for you, Abel, that your sacrifice was accepted. That's great. It's more like, you're my enemy now, because, you are, I didn't get what I wanted, so because of that, you're my enemy. Anyways.
Yeah, at one point, the way the text describes it, I think, is that his face fell,
Yeah,
Cain's.
so, yeah.
But actually the Hebrew there, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think suggests plural. So it would be his faces fell. And you can think of the different faces we wear throughout our life, and that a face that's fallen is drawn down by a very different set of influences than a face that's drawn up. So
Well,
I like thinking about that. Yeah.
like the mask that you've been holding up to your pretense about being loving and kind. Because, look, I go to church and I read all these things. That has fallen away. And what's behind it is the genuine self, which is not about love. It's about, I'm happy if I'm favored and accepted, but if I'm not, or if I don't get my way, then this ain't working out for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Part of the childhood answer I was seeking is actually borne out in the immediate response of Cain to his offering not being accepted.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it culminates in the murder of his brother Abel, whose offering was accepted. And at one point, God calls him out and asks him where his brother is. And this is another interesting linguistics aside, but he says, am I my brother's keeper? And again, I think the Hebrew there suggests doorkeeper, which is really interesting if you think about a life dedicated to opening doors for other people rather than closing them, and being there for people that way.
Right.
That somebody who believes that the primary purpose of religion or spirituality is how it advances their own thinking or reputation or gain, what's in it for them,
Right.
then they're not opening doors for other people, they're closing them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the Lord says to Cain at the point that the murder is unpacked is he says, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And I mean, it's a tragic story and it's a tragic picture, but there is that we are given to each other. We are responsible for taking care of each other. People talk in this day and age about blood family versus chosen family. And I think part of the point that they make is it's more than bloodline that determines relationships. If we really believe that we were given to one another, then whatever physical reasons people have to be relating to and in relationship with each other, that God hopes for that same level of responsibility and care amongst each other across the human race.
Yeah.
So the brother's blood crying out to the Lord from the ground, to me, is a picture of, the life that we're supposed to be regarding as precious. That mindset betrays, when we're only out for ourselves.
Right. And you don't see other people as your brother, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. You can disregard them. You can kill them off. I'm not responsible to you, which of course the Lord says many times how we are responsible to one another, that we're born not for our own sake, but for the sake of others. Or at least, if you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me, these acts of caring for others. So that's what happens when we disregard that as the focus. Like love and charity aren't the focus anymore. Then we start treating each other badly, which is what you see happen in the story.
Yeah.
The church leaves behind charity and love and kindness. And how do we end up with, I forget, I looked it up at some point, how many different, just using the Christian church as an example, how many Christian denominations there are, which I'll say that, well, we have the right faith. No, we have the right faith. And we have the right faith. We get into all this petty disagreements about, dude, it's all about loving each other. How are we not getting this right?
Right.
How do we get so divided on that topic? So Abel dies, and it's interesting that God puts a mark on Cain lest he be killed too, because even if charity departs, if we lose sight of what matters to us, then the Lord's still saying, use your faith. We can't get rid of your faith entirely, because maybe it can bring you back if you actually at some point start to take those truths to heart, live by them, then maybe there'll be a returning. So,
well, if all that's left is an intellectual construct or
yeah,
religion as an idea, the Lord's still going to appeal to what he can to try to bring us back, to try
Right.
to put us back on the right path.
right.
Yeah.
It just again says how the Lord is super cool.
Never gives up on us.
Right, never gives up.
Yeah.
So, what more to say about that story?
Well, I guess one of the things that encourages me to come back to the beginning is, while I may have had some questions as a child, the story's only increased in power as I've gotten older. And I think there's another undercurrent there that's very applicable to the moment in time that we're in, which is not just faith and charity separated, but at odds with each other. And there's this wonderful word in our theology, enmity. And it's this quality that suggests that if you and I are seeing something differently, it's not just a difference of perspective. It's my love of self that wants to see you as the enemy if you see life differently than I do.
Yeah,
And so at some point, it wasn't just one of them was more head and one of them was more heart. It was really that the head was completely disconnected from the heart. And I see it as a warning
yeah,
to us that we don't become so invested in our own perspectives that we become convinced that people that don't see the world the same way we do are our enemy.
yeah.
Hell lurks at the door. In fact, I think that very phrase is used in the story,
I think you're right. Yeah.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the cautions we take from that story? That one and am I my brother's keeper? Well, I think the Lord wanted the answer to be, well, where's your brother? Yeah, well, I care about my brother.
Yeah.
But his answer was, no, it's not my problem. But it kind of is our problem.
And I think I was talking about this in the very first one, that a lot of the word is designed to help us interrogate our own thinking. I was pointing out in the 119th Psalm, it says that, "O Lord, your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path." And I've always taken that to mean that as you're reading the word is reading you. It starts by shining a light on the current state of your life, so that the Lord can lead you somewhere new.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to start where you stand and see what's in the way first. And I think that this is a great example of a story that's designed to help us interrogate our thinking. So rather than seeing this as something long ago and far away,
Yeah.
could we see this as describing a mindset we're all prone to and need to be on our guard against, so that the Lord can lead us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. What I've comes to mind now is what do I cultivate or try to cultivate in my life? You know, the fruit of the ground is more like ideas and truths that am I just about trying to gather more truths, or am I about tending the flock or caring to protect the innocent, trying to be, warm-blooded animals? Am I about love and kindness? Is that what I'm trying to cultivate in my worship, in my life, in my care for others? Like, what's my focus? And I think, Cain has a very different focus than Abel, and this is how I'm presenting to the world. This is how I'm trying to present to God, and it's not acceptable, not because God can't accept us, but because our focus is on the wrong thing, or it's not about fulfilling the mission of life, which is to love each other as God loves us. It's about, let me just show you how right I am.
Yeah. Something you said there, that's really beautiful to me. The interrogating of our thinking would have really changed the outcome for Cain here.
Yeah.
He flew off in a rage. He could have said, "Why didn't the Lord accept my offering?"
Right.
That would have changed the whole plot arc. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Which also says something about how you view God, because if you assume that God's rejected me, like, oh, God's not in the business of rejecting anybody. So what am I bringing to the table that's making it difficult for me to actually let the Lord in my life? It's not that the Lord's not letting me into his life, so to speak. It's what door am I closing?
Come back to doorkeeper.
Yeah.
And we have this seminal teaching that the Lord can only connect to things which are of the Lord in us.
Right.
So if an offering of ours isn't being accepted, maybe it doesn't have enough of what the Lord can actually connect to in it.
Right. It's not about what's lacking in the Lord. It's about what's lacking in us. What is this really about?
Oh,
So.
I love that. So maybe as we go about the rest of our week, we can ask ourselves, as we're setting about to try to think higher thoughts and be more loving and useful people, to have our offerings be those that are acceptable to the Lord. I like that thought.
Yeah. It's good. It's good.
It is good. Love and
It is
peace,
good.
my friends. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Peace.